Pepe, the other part is NATO and what's going on in NATO in the war on in Ukraine, which is, I would say, one of the main issues right now for NATO. What do they want to do? On the part of Europeans, they have 90 billion euros. They have prepared that for Ukraine. So far, they sent 4 billion euros to Ukraine, and
Yes.
they're talking about the rest is ready to be sent to Ukraine. And right now at the NATO summit, they're talking about something like $70 billion in support of Ukraine and what Ukraine is doing against Russia. Donald Trump today said that he talked with Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. Both of them want to put an end to the war and everything. Let's see what he's just he's just repeating the same sort of rhetorics that we've heard so far in more than a year from Donald Trump. How do you see that front?
Very complicated, because this summit is basically the re-weaponizing of Ukraine summit, especially with the ultra billionaire drone program. So this is basically NATO betting on a drone war against Russia to undermine Russia and going all out. The Russians know it. Even before the summit, they already knew that this was the only card left, because NATO doesn't have any serious military card to play. So these drone wars are essentially terrorist wars, because they go against a lot of Russian civilian infrastructure. So what are the Russians doing? You should look at what's happening on the battlefield. And it's very, very important that finally we are getting a Russian response to the drone war in terms of devastating counterattacks against the industrial military complex in Kiev and around Kiev, especially these past 2-3 days. And this is going to increase. And this is responding to, I would say, practically a national consensus in Russia that this is it. This has gone for too long. It's time to end it, and end it our way, and end it on the battlefield. Because we know, once again, Lavrov, the United States is non-agreement capable. What's the point of discussing with Tweedledum and Tweedledee, Witkoff and Kushner in zillion trips to Moscow? Nothing. Nothing's going to happen. So we have to win this on the battlefield. Extra element, what Trump said, I'm so sorry, what Putin said on the record yesterday for the first time. He talked about not only the liberation of Donbass, which is ongoing, but Novorossiya. This is a game changer. This means the whole area that is Russian land, and that goes all the way to Odessa. So this is basically the whole of southeast Ukraine, almost a center southeast Ukraine, almost practically everything. And Russia is framing it in terms of, we are augmenting our buffer zone. Of course, because if they conquer all that, it's going to be close. On the other side will be NATO. So buffer zone, even if they don't conquer everything, but there's going to be a sort of demilitarized zone between what is conquered and what's going to be close to NATO on Western Ukraine. So the new configuration of the SMO is already in effect. It's happening in front of our eyes now. This is something that, for instance, last month in Russia during the St. Petersburg Forum, there was a lot of discussion about, oh, look, the things need to change. And at the time, there was a huge discussion at the top. The National Security Council, with some people, most of them are pretty hardcore hardliners, in fact, like Bortnikov from the FSB, these people. And apparently Putin was listening to them. And Putin obviously was listening to public opinion. And don't forget, there are elections in Russia in September. So the continuation of the war, the old style, is not going to win anybody's hearts. Forget it. And because of these are the counter effects of the unintended consequences of Ukraine ramping up this drone terrorist war against all sorts of targets, some of them energy, but many of them civilian infrastructure. The Russian response is making them pay much more than they could ever imagine. Because the assumption was, okay, we can strike anyone in Russia. They're not going to do anything because they announced their red lines and they never fulfilled them. Not anymore. This ship has sailed. Now it's a completely different story. And something that it has been very enlightening for all of us to compare the war in Ukraine, the proxy war in Ukraine, NATO against, with the American war against Iran, what Russia learned from what Iran did. They learned a lot. And they are going to implement some of it. Not in terms of a decentralized mosaic, because in Russia, the decisions are very much centralized. It's everything is the Minister of Defense, and that you have to follow the line of the Minister of Defense in Moscow. That's it. But they learn to be more supple, to be more creative, more dynamic, and to confound the enemy. Don't forget that many of the Russian, of the Ukrainian generals, they study in Russia, they know how the Russians think. So they need to improvise. They need to be more creative and of course, unleash their firepower, which so far they have unleashed what? Maybe 30%, 40% of what they have. The same thing with Iran. Iran in that war, they unleashed what? Maximum 40% of what they have. So these parallels between the wars are fascinating to follow, in fact. And considering the fact that there is a strategic partnership and they discuss military matters at the highest level, they are obviously passing information back and forth on both fronts. What Iran learned from Russia and what can Russia learn from Iran? So obviously, do they study that in NATO? Of course not. If you read the NATO internal papers, it's always the same shit. They actually believe that they have a chance to undermine Russia with this new drone war, with this multi-billion drone program. So this is what's happening in Ankara, essentially. Lots of money for lots of drones, so Ukraine is going to lose the war a little longer instead of losing in the next few weeks or months. But a very important, it's not a sub-theme. In fact, it's related to the main theme. What is the role of the US in all that? Basically, the US is, at the same time, forcing everybody to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, and at the same time, the US is in the back seat in terms of Ukraine, and this is a European war on Ukraine. The US has nothing to do with that. Okay, we can supply with some intel satellites that you don't have, etc., that we have it all over Europe, etc., but that's it. The actual hardcore war, you have to conduct it. So the Europeans, they look at what they have. What do we have? Nothing. Okay, let's make a lot of drones. This is okay. I think this is the ultra minimalistic explanation to what's going on during this NATO summit. And of course, it's not going to work because the counter Russian response has already started. Okay, we're going to go all out on the battlefield. And we're going to destroy your industrial military complex. Already happening.
Pepe, do you think that the leadership in Russia and Iran, do they fully recognize that these two wars are the same?
Yes. Of course, you won't hear that in public. But fine geopoliticians on both sides, and we have a lot of them, in Tehran and in Moscow. They know that this is the same war because this is essentially what? The multiplied American war against civilization states that do not abide by the American rules, the so-called, the former rules-based international order. Russia and Iran on the front lines, and China, which the ultimate war is going to be the US against China. Three civilization states, three sovereign independent nations, two of them nuclear powers, with an enormous scope across Eurasia. The three of them together, they can expel the US from Eurasia for good. This is a process that has already started. We are in the middle of this process. These three civilization states expelling the United States from Eurasia. So this is turning Mackinder, Mayhem, Spikeman, Brzezinski, all of them upside down at the same time. It's absolutely astonishing what's going on. And now, much, much faster than before. With the war that Iran just won, this accelerated the process. The process was, let's say, was slowly but surely. After the Iranian victory, now it's very, very fast. And if we have this new security umbrella in West Asia, which would be essentially provided by Pakistan, the Saudis, of course, they obviously agree because they have already a military pact which has been upgraded. The Pakistanis have explained to the Iranians, look, this is how it's going to work. Do you agree with that? Well, as long as it doesn't threaten us, Iran, no problem. And of course, the other GCC nations will have to submit, right? And Egypt could be part of it, depending how they're going to placate the American owners of Egypt. And Turkey, of course, when they look at that, they said, look, we are hedging too much. You know, our future is not with NATO. Our future is with Eurasia as a whole. So this is all the velocity escape of this process, which until 3-4 months ago was very slow. Now it's very, very fast. It's changed completely. It's a completely new ball game. And this is something that Trump administration cannot understand because they have less than zero geopolitical thinkers. The only kind of geopolitical thinking that they have inside the administration is somebody like Kobe, the guy who actually redacted the national security doctrine, which is basically a xenophobe. For him, there's only one war that matters, and it's the war of the US against China. He doesn't even understand Eurasia as a whole. He only sees China as the threat to the US. And on NATO, Nima, look at the head of NATO nowadays. He doesn't even qualify as a cartoon character. This guy's leading NATO.
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. So how can they possibly see the big picture in front of them? Even if of course they didn't, even if they had studied Mackinder, Mahan, Spikeman in school, or they were contemporaries of Brzezinski. They read Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, 1997. They still haven't learned about it. And they still haven't learned that when later Brzezinski was saying, maybe it's a bad idea. Maybe we'll try to incorporate Russia into the West. So, you know, when you compare the educational and geopolitical level of people in power in Iran and Russia with the West, of course, it explains everything. They simply cannot see that the chessboard is a different chessboard. The chessboard that he grew up with doesn't exist anymore. They still think that the chessboard in the 90s is the chessboard. This was a long time ago. And that's why what we are seeing today in the streets of Tehran, in Qom, Najaf, Karbala, Mashhad, these millions of people, they are not only celebrating the wisdom of leader Khamenei, the continuation with Moshtaba, but the fact that Iran perfectly understands that the new chessboard is something that Iran is creating now. The chessboard changed because Iran won a war. And that's why everything changed. They cannot possibly understand that in the West, Nima. It's endemically impossible. It's too much. It's too much for them. They will have to revive all their concepts. They will have to adopt diplomacy. Impossible.